Welcome back to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Matt Tice.
And I'm Rondo Moses. This is a podcast about challenger thinking in a world shaped by disruption.
In each episode, we explore the strategies and leadership mindsets that help businesses break from the pack and stay ahead in fast-changing markets.
You're going to hear conversations, case studies, and insights from leaders who are applying these mindsets to thrive in this uncertain environment.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and check us out on our companion blogs at insurgentsgroup.com. See us on YouTube for a summary of takeaways from each episode. Let's get into today's conversation. Rondo, we're going to talk about the war. We've been on the sidelines here for 20 days. It's time to, I think, really unpack what's going on and get a feel for how it affects our audience, the C-suite, the CEO, the
Yeah.
board director. So let's get into it.
Economies and business leaders, right? This is what, week two, I guess, 10, 12 days since this war began. And at least I know in the US, folks assumed that it would be a pretty short excursion, as shared by the president of the U.S. Turns out that we're 2 weeks in and there's no end in sight. Gas prices have gone here from 311 on average to I heard today 385 to 390 per gallon. For regular diesels up to $5 a gallon. So it's already starting to have an impact this early in the game. And if oil goes to $150 per barrel, as some economists are expecting, this is going to go up even further significantly, and people are going to be affected by this.
Sure. And just echoing here in Sydney, uh, we're looking at almost $3 a liter for diesel and mid 250s for premium unleaded, which, sort of when you average it all out, that's almost $9 US for a gallon of diesel, which is well, I have two diesel trucks, so it's not great for me. But setting aside the issue with fuel at the pump, which obviously is going to affect consumers and certainly is a huge issue. We're our expectations are being set here in Australia to look at sort of um, high 4s to 5% inflation in these next two
Hmm.
quarters at least. Those numbers are high. Consequently, the um, Reserve Bank of Australia is tightening money and has raised interest rates twice already this year and is setting expectations that could happen two more times. So, you could be, I guess, my reflection on all this is we're talking about kind of the flow of oil. And in my view, while that is a major factor, I think that the bigger issue globally is going to be the flow of capital, money tightening, and capital is going to correspondingly tighten. More people will be sitting on the sidelines, but there'll be some raiders out there looking for some opportunities. I'd like to come back to that a little bit later. But fundamentally, this is both energy and capital are being affected in a very significant way. So, I think our audience really needs to take note of understanding the impact of how those two important resources are going to flow.
Yeah, and just to your point about inflation here in the U.S., I mean the Fed just decided to keep interest rates flat where they are right now, and has sort of signaled, at least for now, the market is anticipating no more cuts for this year, and not some are saying not until June of 2027. The Fed chair held off yesterday after the meeting from saying we were in stagflation, but there are some economists that are saying it's where stagflation is, even before you take in consideration what's happened with the Iran situation, because of the effects of the tariffs are impacting now, et cetera, et cetera. The PCE, the inflation index, show that core inflation went up. It's ticking up. So it's not going down since last year.
Right.
It's ticking back up. So we have that, and now we have this Iran crisis on top of that. So
Right. I think I saw the statistics for the US putting inflation at 3.3 to 3.5 for this first half of the year. So that's
yeah.
you know, that's a tick up, but you probably have a little bit more of a cushion on energy, perhaps, than most of the rest of the world, to be frank. But anyway, you look at it, and I agree with you, Rondo. You take 20% or some amount between 15 and 20% of the world's oil, gas, um, agricultural inputs, fertilizer, et cetera, off the table. And it's really hard to imagine that we don't find ourselves in a recessionary situation this year. It's
Yeah,
sort of, I'd be putting that at about 75%. But right? In many ways, this feels a lot like COVID, right? So now, while the externalities here are created by probably a series of ill-timed bad choices, COVID was very different, but fundamentally, they're both supply shock kind of crises for the most part. So, I guess minus being quarantined in this situation. So, my thinking is that if you're a CEO who's been through the COVID experience, you ought to be pretty well prepared for this. So I guess when we saw COVID come, there was sort of two playbooks. Okay. And from my perspective, those playbooks apply exactly to this situation. Playbook A, which is basically ride it out and put your head in the sand and wait for this to go away. Obviously, cut costs and do those other things that you need to do to stabilize your business. That's playbook A. And we called that the deer. Remember, Rondo, back in the day? That's the deer approach. And I think playbook B is a different one, is the insurgent playbook, which is now everyone is on the back foot here. We have not only do we have this energy shock, we have also AI playing a key role. So we have these two externalities that are coming at us. I think this is an opportunity rich environment. So, whilst capital is not going to flow and energy is going to be constrained and your supply chain costs and disruption will be up, my question is, can you find a way to be on the front foot on the attack in this environment, searching for opportunities where others are pulling back? I think that's the playbook. We call that the wolf playbook. And I think that being able to get into a leadership mindset that whilst the world is crumbling around you, there are plenty of opportunities to exploit. That's where I want you to be.
yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I've been thinking about is how can leaders who can see this as energy as a hidden strategic lever for them. Is it possible for certain companies in certain industries to see that as a strategic lever where you place your new operations located? If you have, do you use um, alternative energy sources like clean energy sources? So that gives you an advantage over others. How are you using energy in this way to as a strategic lever? How are you pricing in a way that shows that you're not necessarily taking advantage of this crisis, but getting closer to your customers and demonstrating your loyalty to customers through this kind of a crisis? That's what I'm going to be looking for.
Interesting, Rondo. I think that speaks to a kind of also what's the timing on all this? Is this a three, a six, a nine, 12, a 24-month sort of situation? Certainly, even if they cleaned it all up today and they got to the table and announced a ceasefire, it would be until the end of the year until even some of it started to normalize. So I think we can confidently say that that's going to be this year at least. So I agree with you. So let's just assume that the median case is 2 years, maybe 3 years, of where these disruptions will flow through the economy. So that is within the time frame of where do I build the factory? Where do I put my resources? Which markets do I compete in? Which customers do I prioritize, et cetera? So I think
Yeah.
that's all really quite important.
How do I look at my supplier relationships and do I need to, readjust those in a way that gives me more advantage than I had before this crisis? I think all of those, especially when you look at some of to your point about AI and the data centers, you had some of these AI companies that had data centers in the Gulf, in the Middle East, and so some of them gotten hit. So now you got to think about that. Are they going to be bringing more of those data centers back? Locating them, for example, in the U.S., creating more data short or energy shortage here. So what are companies going to do about that? How do you put yourself in a situation where you're not being disadvantaged by those kinds of moves by the AI players, for example?
Mm.
Or if you're already someone who's leveraging alternative energy sources, how do you use that to create a revenue source for yourself or other companies who are looking for energy as well, alternative energy sources?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think given how energy intensive AI is, I really haven't heard much in terms of this nascent industry pulling back a little bit to almost sort of support the marginal um, the marginal cost of energy in this environment. So presumably, if the marginal demand from that sector sort of pulls back, it might have an impact. And I think, interestingly, to your earlier point, if I just want to pick up the diversification of the energy mix to more clean sources, for example, I'd be really surprised if we didn't see a significant acceleration of nuclear on the back of this.
Yes.
Okay. I think that, all this pullback on electric vehicles might go the other way. And certainly, wind and solar, probably more solar will will start to play an increasing role. I think the Chinese are probably going to be feeling pretty good about the work that they've done to diversify their energy in this situation. Coal will probably tick up again. I haven't checked the coal price this week, but I would imagine that that will go up, and some alternative energy, other energy sources will tick up. So I think it's going to rebalance in an interesting way. But if you look at all this stuff, there's a lot going on. The other thing I think is interesting, coming back to my earlier point, is, coming back to capital. If you're sitting in a situation where let's say you were an acquisitive mindset 3, 4, 10 weeks ago and looking for opportunities, I think this is going to be an even more interesting time to,
Mhm.
be out there on the front foot in an acquisition mindset, because there will be plenty of firms that are ready to cry uncle. And you may have a sort of a significant advantage in this environment to be able to to command a discount in those sorts of negotiations. So I think that's also an interesting factor. So I think there's a lot going on. One thing I think that virtually every executive team on the planet ought to be doing, if they're not doing it right this minute, is gaming all this out and
Yeah.
dusting off their scenario planning books and trying to figure out, where these opportunities are. And I think, at least here in Australia, these techniques are probably underplayed a bit. I don't think that they're as mainstream either as they used to be or should be. But if you and your team are not working this problem aggressively and sort of trying to figure out where that opportunity space is and how to protect your downside and what the different scenarios might look like, I think that's a miss for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking too, particularly when you look thinking about industries like transportation, steel industry, manufacturing, these are industries that are definitely going to get hit hard. Right? There are probably going to be winners and losers out of this. So to your earlier point about capital, um, companies can look around to see who in the industry is probably going to cry uncle first, and maybe there's partnership opportunities, there's acquisition opportunities. But I would certainly be thinking about those industries where they are more vulnerable to this shift, in addition to, of course, chemical industries, et cetera.
It's going to be virtually everything, right? I mean, it's sort of just working back from the consumer. It's likely that demand will cut back as people have to make trade-offs on, do I fill up my car so I can go pick up my kid from school, or do I buy something that I don't need, some discretionary purchase. So I think that will dial back virtually everything. We'll see, but and I hope not. And we'll also sort of see how much slosh there is in the market in terms of that discretionary income. I think the downside, and I think this is really unfortunate, is we've had this situation of almost these two-speed economies where, the wealthy are diverging from the middle class and the lower economic class. I think this is going to accelerate that divide even more. I think that's going to be
Yeah.
a real problem. And on the back end of this, I think governments around the world are going to be faced with a lot of political pressure to be able to shore that up. So I think, we'll also see downstream from all this some pretty interesting fiscal and tax policy implications as well.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's been a lot of talk about this K-shaped economy in the US, where, the wealthier people are doing a little better than people who are on the lower end of the rung. But even more so, some of the wealthier people are moving and being even more selective about what they buy. So some of them are going to shopping at Walmart, for example. So Walmart is changing some of their strategy to communicate more to that wealthier crowd as well. So I think this opens up opportunities for brands to also think about how they market themselves as well during this kind of turnaround.
Yeah, that's a great point. In this period where, everyone's trying to figure this out as it stands, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I, I think it'd be useful to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about what's actually happening. So, in some ways, this whole situation is a great sort of case study in the insurgent incumbent divide here, right? So,
Mm.
in many ways, I think with the U.S. and Israel kind of coalition coming in and attacking Iran, applying what I would describe as very much incumbent assumptions, right? So we'll
Hmm.
bomb them, regime will collapse, this thing will last a week or two, and we'll all declare victory and go home. Clearly, that's not what's happened. Even though some of those things have happened, at the end, now Iran is very much in the insurgent mindset, or that they're playing
Yes.
that sort of side of it. And, particularly their leverage with in the Strait. That's obviously they've got a lot of power there, with relatively little amount of investment and manpower to be able to maintain control of that sort of throttle. I think it's really interesting that the it was either ignored in the planning, or it was missed, that could have been an eventuation. And then I think the second thing is obviously the attacks on the neighboring countries in the Middle East has played a big role in terms of antagonizing the region, and now it's just like a hornet's nest. And I think that's created a significant instability that leaves very little, a very narrow set of options for this small coalition to be able to bring this to closure.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about it from that through that lens, sort of Iran looked at the Strait of Hormuz as its sort of distinctive leverage point. We think about distinctive capabilities as this distinctive leverage point, and the other Gulf countries as vulnerabilities for the incumbents. And so, whereas maybe the U.S. and Israel didn't think that Iran would put them in play, they saw it strategically as their best move to counter, this big U.S. force and Israel coming at them. They're going to where their strengths are, and they're
Agreed.
playing that up.
And I think, we always talk about sort of this idea of, you know, playing a different game than your competitor, right? So
Right.
it's quite clear that the Israel US coalition is playing a military game. Meanwhile, Iran is playing a political and economic game, right? So
Yes.
they're not aligned. They're not playing the same game. And to your exact point, the capabilities and levers available in those different sort of mindsets are very different, right? So through the political lens, to your point, undermining the wider Middle East, and to be frank, the European and the Asian um, support for the U.S. and Israel is has been very successful so far, and
Hmm.
economically, as we've already discussed, you're taking 20% of the world's oil off the table. It's an economic sort of catastrophe, really. So I think that's really interesting. So Rondo, how do you get out of this, right? So you're thinking about scenarios of, you're kind of boxed in politically, you're boxed in economically, and you control the levers militarily. Let's take that side of it. how do you get out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a that's the million-dollar question. One thing I would say, one other thing I just want to back up and say is that I think we as the US, when we attacked Iran with Israel, we assumed that by taking out the leader, we would take down the regime. And not understanding that within the context of that regime, there's always a replacement. That's the way that they think. I mean, these regimes go back centuries, right? So there's always a replacement. Whereas in other countries, like for example in Venezuela, where the U.S. went in and took out the president there, that control was taken over, and I think we applied the same playbook and the same mindset to Iran that we applied in Venezuela, which was a mistake because even if we take out the new leader, there's another person ready to step into his shoes. So we have to
Yep.
recognize that that's not necessarily the key to winning in a place like Iran. So I think the way to end has to be a negotiation to give Iran some security that we will not attack them again, and it has to be some sort of security guarantee, I would imagine, from there through their lens, because this is the second negotiation that turned into an attack, right? So the trust level is, I think, destroyed to some extent. So we'd have to really do something dramatic on our end to say, hey, and it will never be a mea culpa, but hey,
Sure.
you can rest assured that we'll allow you to operate peacefully without attacking you, and you won't attack us. And in exchange for that, you have this guarantee from us. I think that that's the way it would have to be played.
I agree completely. I'm going to break down my analysis of this in 2 minutes or less. Okay, so I think in order to get to that point, um, one is obviously nuclear security, right? So, in my question about nuclear security, I think hinges on a set of assumptions about where is that material and how far are these guys along in developing it, right? So, if you look at the Iranian side, um, and you're in Iran right now, and you're trying to figure out how do you manage this, I would say their optimal play, all things equal, would be to have already extracted that material and be working on sort of finishing that job and demonstrating that capability as quickly as possible. So, question one is um, is nuclear security possible? And does Iran
Mm,
have an incentive to be able to essentially to give up on that dimension? I would argue right now, all things equal, they have a disincentive to do that, right? I don't know what the intelligence is. Maybe everyone knows exactly where that material is, but if not, then there's a non-zero chance that they could finish that work and demonstrate that capability probably relatively quickly. If you believe the stories that we've been told about 2 weeks to 2 weeks to that capability, one might assume that if that material was somewhere else, that 2 weeks is now in some ways, right?
right.
So um, I don't think that's probably the case, but it could be, and I think it's really interesting to understand that. So the assumption that that material um, is where it was back in June, and that it's buried under tons of rubble, I think is a risky assumption to make. So that's the first one.
Mm,
So I guess if you're assuming that that's still the case, then the obvious place to go next is what would it take to extract that material? So
right.
tens of thousands of people and lots of equipment and a ton of capital and a compliant enemy to actually be able to extract that, protect it, and pull it out without creating at least an environmental catastrophe, if not a humanitarian catastrophe. So that's my first leap. That's my first point. So that then brings me to the point about incentives, right? So what incentive does Iran have um, to comply, to your point, to a security guarantee? Obviously, you made the point already, and it's been widely made that they were attacked during negotiations, so there is no trust there. So the U.S. Israel coalition seems to be betting that Iran is um, unlikely sorry, that there's a strong lever to pull on Kark Island and the gas fields in Iran,
Right.
right? For example, we won't bomb these areas. And there was some news over the last day or two about Israel bombing. I think it was South Pars. Um, so that's a factor too. But that it's interesting, and this is a smaller microcosm of the whole situation. The Western incumbent view of this um, is basically they have all the cards until they actually bomb it, right? So as long as Iran believes that there's more downside to them bombing it than upside to, again, back to the political and economic consequences, then
Mhm.
maybe they care, maybe they don't. But once it's done, it can't be undone. That bell can't be unrung. So I don't actually think there's all that much leverage to not bombing Kark Island or other things. Israel may have already made that calculus, and that may be why they've, attacked the South Pars fields, which then again, that bell's already been rung. You can see the U.S. administration backpedaling on that right now. So there's no trust there. Therefore, no incentive. So I think they don't really care. Blow it up because you're just shooting yourself in the foot, right? So that's two. And what other incentives are here? I'm not sure. The Strait clearly is a key issue. I've tried to do the math on that. I can't see how um, convoys or minesweepers or any of that is going to open up more than 5%, 5 to 10% more capacity. But the risk is going to be enormously high. And even if you sent 20, 30, 50,000 people in there to sweep up the 75 miles between the coast and inland, and filled it with helicopters and ships and whatever else you need, that's going to be
Yeah.
really it's going to be very costly. And the odd drone will obviously slip through and create some damage. And crews, captains, insurers, etc., don't want to deal with that. So I'm not as convinced that there's a solution to that. So that brings me then to ground invasion. Back to my point about securing the nuclear material and securing the strait. Um, that's a huge escalation. And I'd say
Yeah.
that all things equal, that's where we're probably heading. But let me circle back to your point. I think there is an optimal solution. I've been waiting for somebody to say it, and you've sort of said it halfway, but here's my solution. And I want to put this on record because to me, the best solution to this is yes, a security guarantee, but not by the US. I think that a Chinese security guarantee is the best solution. Let me tell you why. So, China is largely a neutral player here, but has a big stake in the energy. Um, they have a transactional, by all accounts, a transactional relationship with Iran, and China could broker, because they do have that relationship, uh, a ceasefire, which then would negotiate, I would say, three things, right? One, open the strait, or at least open the strait to Chinese traffic. Um, Two, secure the nuclear material. In other words, China takes custody of that nuclear material. And three, offers a security guarantee for Iran, so long as Iran stays out of Israel, provides a security guarantee in return to its western and eastern neighbors, and and then China underwrites that. I think that gives the U.S. kind of an elegant back out because they've already sort of made some um, though they've made it clear that they're looking for partners, right?
Right.
I don't think the Europeans can do it because they're too aligned to the US. And I don't think the Russians can do it because they're too aligned to Iran. I think it's only China. And I think that gives everyone a back out. Israel, they want the nuclear capability out of Iran. China can guarantee that. That's a win. The U.S. wants an easy way out of this, and no, and the rest of the world, doesn't want to see a U.S.-China conflict. So, to me, that's the best solution.
But do you see the US allowing China to negotiate an agreement on their behalf?
Not on their behalf,
Okay.
right? So,
Okay.
I would say that no, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying that what they're doing is they're giving Iran an out. Okay, so we'll take the nuclear material off the table, but we'll provide a security guarantee for you. Right? It has nothing to do with the U.S. Okay, but it
Okay.
gives the U.S. a de-escalation pathway, right? Which then gives them an opportunity to negotiate with China at arm's length to Iran, Israel maybe at the table as well. And I think that provides a kind of an elegant solution to this. Now, there are egos here. You know, is Xi and Trump going to,
Right.
how will they maneuver relative to each other? But I think every week this goes on, the downsides go up, right? So, and those downsides eventually will, in my opinion, unless China has unfettered access to that energy, um, China will have to come off the sideline at some point. So I think it's best for them to come off the sideline now and negotiate a ceasefire and start negotiating with Iran to take that material out of Iran. They also have the capability to quarantine and to, at some level destroy that material. So that, that's feasible. And that is a Russia neutral solution, which, the Russians aren't going to be super happy about it because right now we haven't talked about Russia, but with
Yeah.
the constraint on this 20% of the world's energy, Russia is obviously a main beneficiary to that. And
Right.
anything that potentially prevents that would be problematic for Russia for them to keep, realizing the windfall from the change in these sanctions. But China is also the only player that can counter effectively Russia. So I think that's the best solution. I think that also it would allow Trump to save face because if the goal is to take the the fissile material out of Iran, that can be achieved. And then for Israel, the goal largely to degrade the Iranian military for a generation, that's also been achieved. So to
Mhm.
me, that's the win-win-win for everybody.
But it's interesting. I don't, if that were the reason for the attack, I would agree with you. But the various stories have shifted because the original story was it was regime change. Wasn't because, and then it became they were an imminent threat because of nuclear weapons. But we just heard yesterday in the Senate hearings that, Tulsi Gabbard, said that there was no imminent threat from Iran, and it hasn't been an imminent even last June. So it's
Okay.
hard to believe that that is what was the threat. The
Okay.
threat, this
I don't
attack
think
was
that
really more
I
about,
disagree with you, Rondo. I agree with you in terms of your analysis, okay, but I disagree that that's where we're at now, right? So, whatever the reason at the beginning, the facts on the ground today
but
are
are we here now because it's a narrative or because it's a reality?
we're here because it's a reality, right? So the narrative may have been regime change, right, at the beginning, but the reality now is the straits are closed, right? American and Israeli um, service men and women are being killed, and the
Absolutely.
rats are lining up to get off the ship in the U.S. One more thing, can I just say one more
Yeah.
thing? I didn't mention
Yeah.
this. I think that um, there is another scenario, which, to your point about regime change, which is the implosion or overthrow of the Iran regime. That could happen, right? They were betting on that, but it's not happened. So I'm not confident.
No.
You said earlier
No.
that they're resilient to that. I agree
They're,
with you. I don't think
they're
that's
resilient to that.
right? So
Yeah.
not only that, it's sort of like you keep poking. Anyone that's poked a hornet's nest with a stick knows that they're not going to give up. You know what I mean? But I think it's plausible that it could happen. I don't think it's likely. Equally, on the other side of the equation, I think it's plausible that the Israeli and or the American government could change leadership in this period too. So I don't hear anybody talking about that, but I would say that there is let's call it an administration change scenario on the US and Israeli side, which is also plausible but unlikely, right?
Right.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
but that could change the facts on the ground at some point in this calendar year.
Yeah,
Let's it stretches out, but I just keep coming back to all the solutions that are possible. And to your point, I think it's inevitable that there'll be a negotiated agreement. I think the cost of trying to force a regime change in Iran is too high, politically, economically, and militarily. So that's really that would be a very poor bet,
yeah,
but it still may happen. Therefore,
yeah.
the only question is then how do you arrange a negotiated settlement that allows everybody to save just enough face to get out of this thing and move on?
Yeah, I think that's where we are now. For Iran, I don't think it's about saving face. I think they are about
Survival.
making no, I think they're about making the U.S. and Israel suffer right now. They want to. This is payback, right? For I think more so the president of the U.S. Donald Trump. I think he is trying to find a way out of it. Israel, I also don't think wants to get out of it right now because I think, and that's the other thing that we'd have to consider too. How do you get not just the U.S. to agree, but how do you get Israel to agree? How do you get Israel to agree that they won't attack Iran? Because that's the other part of it too. You have three players here. It's
I
not
agree with
just,
that. I agree.
right. So that makes it harder, I think, as well.
I'm not saying that would be easy. I just think it's the optimal solution, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
um, and I agree that the Iranians, they're the hornets right now, right? And they're going to go around
Yeah,
stinging people. But um, once you settle down and realize that that's not a sustainable sort of strategy going forward, eventually what they need is security, and they're not going to have that as long as, let's say for the sake of argument, there was a ceasefire today that was brokered by the Europeans, or they just everyone decided to take a break. Um, all of the problems persist. Fissile material still there, right?
yeah,
Iranian regime still there. Um, Israel still doesn't feel safe. Donald Trump's ego is still hurt. It's a no-win situation for everybody. So unless you can take those core issues off the table one at a time, right? No bomb, no prospect of a bomb. Israel's long-term security is much better, right? So the setting aside what Bibi wants to do, I think that would get a lot of support from the Israelis. The Iranian regime gets to survive and live to fight another day and gets Chinese security cover. That's a win for them, no doubt. China
right,
gets the political win. The US gets to declare the military win and gets out and doesn't have to put boots on the ground. Europeans get their gas. The only loser in that scenario is Russia.
right.
Um, so to me, that's the optimal solution. I'll say it one more
I
time.
also think that because of the bombing happening in the Gulf, that you have some of these Gulf countries are probably behind the scenes pushing to get some closure here as well because they're being attacked. So I think that they play a vital role in this as well. Although I'm not sure if Iran will trust Saudi Arabia because,
Yeah,
they're
only really
basically
Oman can play this role, right?
right.
So, is Oman big enough, powerful enough? I would say that a role for an Oman could be to bring China to the table, as I've described, but I think only a major power is going to be able to turn the dial on this. Otherwise, I see it going nowhere else but escalating. To your point, the Iranians are the hornets right now, and these other solutions are not obvious to the Americans and the Israeli government. So I think they're going to escalate. I don't see any other way it happens.
I agree.
Unless that 5% chance that they find a solution to the Hormuz Strait where they can fully restore that traffic. But I think that's just too hard. I think that, as long as a handful of drones can be launched out of the back of a Toyota to cause major havoc to three, four, $500 million cargo ships, that's, I
Right.
don't think that's tenable. It's only got to happen a handful of times before everyone realizes that that doesn't work. God forbid there's one of the minesweepers from a European nation or Asian nation, Japanese, whatever, gets sunk in the strait. That's not going to be a good look. And then you start seeing things careening off in a direction of sort of regional, perhaps global escalation, which is not what we want. So
Yeah.
circling back to that, the quicker you can get to a negotiated settlement that addresses these main issues, the better.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and again, it's got to be what would get the Iranians to say uncle, and what would get the sort of U.S. Israel contingent to say uncle. That's
No, no,
and
there's
finding
no
that
uncle.
common
There's
ground.
no uncle. There's no Iranians saying uncle, right? So let's play this out, right? Yeah, I don't know how many. I think it's something or somewhere north of 90 million people in Iran,
90 million. Yeah.
whatever that number is, right? It's a lot of people, right? So, but let's assume there's, a million of the Revolutionary Guard, right? Now, I promise you, those people are not going without energy or food or resources or amenities, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, it's been clearly demonstrated that that group of people doesn't care about the other 90 million. You know what I mean? So their capacity for suffering is virtually unlimited. So unless there was, like we said before, an internal implosion, I don't see them crying uncle. I can't see it. You're going to blow up Kark Island? Fine. You know what I mean? We
Right.
have our own reserves. You know what I mean? It's fine. Going to blow up our gas field? We don't care. We're going to be fine for a decade. It doesn't matter. And
I guess
I
what I was saying when I
don't see
say
it. They're
cry
not going to
uncle.
cry uncle. Israel's never going to cry uncle. That's just not in their never. And I don't
Yeah.
see Americans crying uncle either.
I
But
guess I used the wrong
regime
term.
change in
I just
America.
mean them coming to the
Yeah.
table to say, yes, let's, coming to an agreement. I guess that's what I
What's
meant.
the incentive? This comes back to incentives. What's the
Right.
incentive? Right? I
Yeah.
don't think cry uncle's the incentive. I don't think it's a bigger bomb in another place. Um, it's it's
No,
something
no, no, no. I
else,
agree.
right? It's something else. And I think you nailed it right at the beginning. It is some kind of security guarantee,
Oh, yeah. Has to
and
be.
everyone's got to save face. I mean, it's a really tricky one. I think we should come back to this, but let's just wrap up. I mean, it's easy to kind of go off on a tangent and scenario plan the global thing. Nobody's really listening to us on that end of it.
Right.
Maybe if I don't know, Alistair Campbell or Rory Stewart pick up this podcast, and we could have a chat about our solution here. But ultimately, I come back to what does it mean for business, right? Get your house in order and get on the front foot. Search for opportunities here. Look for ways that you can create daylight between you and your competitors in this environment, and use this as an opportunity to emerge stronger from this sort of set of externalities than when you came into it with.
Yeah. And I think your earlier point about, doing some scenario planning is key during this time.
Absolutely. Well, let's see how it plays out, Rondo. Thanks. That was really a lot of fun. So we'll we'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode. And please come find us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and look for our companion blogs on our website, insurgentsgroup.com. See you soon, Rondo.
See you soon, Matt.